Alrighty. Well, howdy, folks. Welcome to the fourth annual AnimState of the Industry. This is a presentation where I collect all the results from the annual survey that we do and do a bit of stats, magic, and analysis. And we get to talk about some interesting findings and some follow up on some continuous trends that we've been doing. So, my name is Adam Clark. I have a master's in quantitative, qualitative, and psychometric methodology. I am also the resident data analysis and at Adams State, and responses were collected from January to February of this year. So, just going to briefly go through a quick walkthrough of what we're going to be looking at this presentation. We'll start with some general descriptives about the sample that we collected this year. We're going to get into income and compensation, work from home, some factors over the general work environment, factors on leadership, your excitement and ways that you stated in the survey, struggles in both the studio and the industry that y'all have experienced. And then we're going to do a bit more of a further exploration slash deep dive on those topics. So, without any further delay, let's just get right into it, I think. So, descriptives. Who are we? Where are we? And how many are we? So, this year we got 297 responses from across the globe. I just want to take the second to say that we are always truly humbled and grateful at the amount of responses that we get on this survey. It makes doing stats so much easier, and we get such a wealth of information and variety of worldviews. Breaking that down just a little bit from that large number, 67.1% of us were responding from North America, that being Canada and the US. 63.9% of us work primarily in AAA industry, and 87.2% of the individuals this year worked full-time in games animation. Let's go even a bit more in depth. So, breaking down the question of what continent are you located in, we see that 67.8% once again are North American, 2% were responding from Oceania, 1.7% from South America, 3.7% from Asia, and 24.8% from Europe. And breaking down the game industry sectors, we have that 63.9% in the AAA industry. We have 33.8% in the indie games industry, 7.8% in live service, 9.5% in mobile, 8.8% in VR and AR, and 1% in third-party engines and tools. Breaking down a bit more on the other side of things, like who are we? 72.5% of respondents reported as being white, 74.1% responded as being cisgendered men, 19.7% responded as cisgendered women, and 6.2% responded as non-cisgendered individuals, that being intersex, non-binary, agender, transgender men, transgender women. Getting into income and compensation this year. First thing that I like to go over every time we do this is the percent reported FTE income. It's full-time employment from 2021 to 2023. As years go by in this survey, you're going to see more and more lines added to this graph. And I think it really gives a good idea of just where we stand proportionally on who's responding with how much they receive in full-time income. So, as you can see, the general overall trend of all these lines are relatively in the same range for each pocket of income. A large majority of individuals are reporting still that they're receiving less than $40,000 for this. For this sample, that's going to be around the 14 to 16% margin if you look across all the years. And then specifically taking the line from 2023, our current year, we can see I've added a orange line at that 80,000, 89,000 mark. That represents 50% of individuals in the survey. So less than, or so 50% of individuals who responded to the survey make less than $89,000 a year. And 50% make more than $89,000 a year. Let's take a look at it in a different angle. Instead of talking about percent of respondents reporting their survey, let's just take a look at the average FTE compensation by years worked. And once again, this is from 2021 to 2023. And you can see down here, we have this broken up into brackets of less than 1 year worked in the games animation industry, 1 to 5, 6 through 10, all the way to over 25 years. And we can see we cover quite a large range. And actually, the space between the years and between data points within each year bracket starts getting a bit larger as we get further on in years. But here's a new thing that I added this year, and this is inflation adjusted compensation. And I wanted to show this because, as you saw in the last slide, bring that back up, we can see there's a lot more variation within the same year bracket across years. But when we account for inflation, all those lines tighten a bit. And we can see that despite maybe small changes or small increases in FTE wage across 2021 to 2023. When we adjust the latter years for 2023 buying power, it seems to stay at the same rate. There's no remarkable, I should say, increase, and there's no remarkable decrease. Whether that's bad or good, I think would be a great thing to talk about in the roundtable coming up next. And here's just another way to visualize that. This is just lumping all of the year brackets together to get the average income across all years from 2021 to 2023. On the left-hand side, you can see the non-inflation adjusted income. So in 2021, that was about $82,000 in 2021 money. And then you can see in 2023, our average is at $90,800 on average. But if you adjust 2021 and 2022 for 2023 buying power, you can see that really 2023 is not much different. In fact, very closely resembles 2021. So continuing on, let's look at reported additional compensation 2021 to 2023. So reading from left to right, blue is 2021, 2022, and goldenrod is 2023. And one of the things I really just wanted to show in this graph here is overtime and royalties. We can see a systematic decrease in the amount of respondents reporting that they get overtime across 2021 to 2022 and 2023 being the lowest in that category. And the same thing can be also seen for royalties as well. However, annual raises has increased by about 5% in 2023 as compared to the other past 2 years. So this is just looking at reported additional compensation, but just for 2023. And I wanted to make a quick note here. The bars here that are colored goldenrod are the new categories that we included in the survey this time around, that being matching retirement investments, fitness stipends, home office stipends, and signing bonuses. Now, that being said, annual bonus is still the highest reported additional compensation received from that respondents stated throughout the survey. Now, that being said, the second largest being matching retirement investment. Well, we're just glad that we have added that category to this list because that seems to be a very large trend in the industry as of right now, as well as fitness stipend, home office stipend, and signing bonuses. So this is breaking down how much people receive from the additional compensation that they get. And once again, I've added an orange line to show that 50% mark in this graph. So 50% of individuals who respond to the survey say they receive less than $5,000 in additional compensation, whereas 50% say can range from $5,000 to $9,999, all the way to $90,000 uh, and $99,999. And here we're going to take both the additional income received from the additional compensation as well as their full time yearly salary. And we can see here that with that orange line, yet again, we see about 50% of individuals receive less than $99,999 in total combined income per year. So that's talking just about full-time employment rates, but let's talk about contractor rates as well. And we can see here, this is percent of respondents in terms of what they report their rate as being. Um, Once again, across 2021 to 2022. And we can kind of see just looking at this graph that the same trend is happening year over year over year, where 26 to $50 an hour is always the highest point that contains the most amount of individuals. And we see a sharp decline after that until we get into the 126 to $150 an hour range. Now, this is not inflation adjusted. And what I find interesting about that is it kind of shows that contractor and freelance rates are staying relatively the same year after year after year. So let's talk about how satisfied you are with your compensation. And this is just once again 21 to 23. Um, what is nice about this is that if you look to the right, the two last categories, so very much so in the category before that, we see that we are getting our highest reported satisfaction scores in 2023. So it seems that overall, across these 3 years, people are most satisfied with their compensation this year. And just to kind of drive that point home a little bit, in 2023, we see also some of the lowest uh, unsatisfied scores as well. Now, this is, though, a combination of everybody. So this is full-time employment individuals as well as contractor individuals. But let's just look at contract and freelance individuals by themselves in terms of their compensation satisfaction. And it tells a bit of a different story. I'm just going to go to the next slide here so you can see what I mean. Um, Starting from the right-hand side again, the two last categories, we can see that full-time employment compensation satisfaction is quite higher. So people who are full-time employed are reporting higher satisfaction than those who are contract or freelance, which backs up that point I was making earlier about the fact that it does not seem like the rates are being really changed or distributed with freelance or contractor positions. So, still talking about pay, but in a different light, let's talk about positions and pay. So, first off, what are our roles? So, just looking at what people reported as being this year's survey. Starting off, most individuals said that they were animators. This question itself was a select all that applies, so people could say, yes, I'm an animator, technical animator. Um, so that's why we're seeing 77% saying, I'm also an animator. We had 23% of individuals saying that they're lead and directors, 18% of individuals saying that they're technical animators, 3% are programmers, 1% producers, and 0.7% being outsource managers. That's two individuals, if anyone is curious. Well, what do you do, though? This is a new question that we added. We wanted to get a better understanding of what responsibilities people report having in the studio and work environment in general. And once again, that's a select all that applies question. So 85% of you said that you have some hand, one way or another, in animation creation. Um, 69% of individuals say that they work in animation implementation, 36 in animation system design, 33% in tools and workflows, 30% in people management, 26 in rigging and skinning, 25 in directing vision, 19 in programming and scripting, and 16% in project management. Okay, but what are we being paid to do these tasks? So, looking at individuals who just said animation creation as their sole responsibility in the studio slash workplace environment, that's the animation creation only that you see at the top of the list here. The average reported income for these individuals is $65,200. Um, then we have animation creation overall. So that's anybody who reported being involved in animation creation. And you can see that kind of inflates that average quite a bit to $88,000 an hour or a year. um, then we have animation implementation at $72,800. And it keeps getting larger and larger at looking at animation system design, tools and workflows at that $111,000 mark. People management at $127,000 mark. Rigging and skinning actually falls back down to $77,000. Directing vision at $134,000. Programming and scripting at $99,000, and project management at $137,000. So what I find interesting between these two graphics I've put here, these two data visualizations, is that it seems to be a bit of an inverse in terms of uh, what people say they do, or how many people I should say that they do these certain responsibilities, and the increase in pay as we get to lower and lower tasks on this list that had a smaller amount of people saying they were doing it. But that's just for responsibilities. How is our pay by title? And so people who responded as being only animators uh, reported making on average $75,000. Uh, um, then the animator overall, so anybody who said that they are also an animator, we see that jump up a bit to $81,000 a year. Technical animators, 79,000. Programmers, 91,000. Producer, 120,000. Outsource manager, 125,000. And lead and director, 141,000. So I just wanted to make one note because I touched on that briefly about the producer and manager options categories. I should say. For each one, we had 2 and 3 respondents respectively, so that data might just be a little unreliable, but we're happy for those 2 and 3 people. Now, here's just a way to visualize how large responsibilities are within each job title. As we can see for animators, for an example, their main primary responsibility is animation creation. That's that blue section. The next biggest responsibility they have is animation implementation, followed by animation system design, rigging and skinning, then a little bit of programming, tools and workflow as well. Um, the upper ones, I think it got cut off in my slide view, which is fun, but that is people management and directing vision. So just to kind of show an inverse here, if you jump over to lead and director, let's say, we can see that a lot more of their time is being spent in people management, directing vision, and project management. Those 3 top categories here. Same with producers and outsource managers, which kind of shows why the average reported wage for those individual positions is higher because they spend a lot more time doing responsibilities that also have an higher average income value to them. And finally, for this section, just want to touch on how does work from home affect pay. So we asked individuals who work remotely or work from home, how is your pay adjusted based on where you live? So 13% of individuals say my pay is increased based on where I live slash am located. My pay is 40% of individuals say that. What I find interesting about this is that 34% of individuals said, I do not know how my pay is adjusted uh, while I work from home. Considering that, I feel like just some advice would be to definitely figure that out. Um, and then finally, my pay is decreased based on where I live slash am located at 3.5%. I also looked through the free response options this time around to get a better understanding of maybe some more options or ways, some more techniques studios may use to negotiate and adjust pay with this new work from home trend that's continuing onward. And I found that a few different other techniques that were not covered in our main survey options, that being pay based on industry standards. So just looking at the average wage someone would get for the job that they're applying for. We also have market value, which is specifically focused on how much studios willing to pay based on the skills the employee can bring in. We see as a close brother to that one, employer slash employee negotiations, just purely negotiating wage based on hiring and during that HR hiring process. And then we also see local competition for the employer for where that individual lives. So if there is high demand or more studios in a certain area and an individual lives in that area, they may have a bit more bargaining power, or right out the gate, studios may offer more to get them on board and not with other studios. Finally, for a few individuals talking about working in another country, said a lot of their pay was predicated on the international currency rate. And I wanted to put that in there because I mostly understand that, but if we could get some more information on how that impacts their income, that would be amazing. So let's get into work from home next. So, who's working from home? Let's look at this from 2021 to 2023. In 2021, we had a 100% response rate of individuals working from home or at least being hybrid. And if we go over to 2023, we see we're at that 98% mark, with 2022 being the largest dip in respondents saying um, that they may be, working completely in office, at 95% of individuals saying that they worked from home that year. So, how are studios' plans changing over work from home? As you can see on the left hand side, we have what are your studio's plans for working in the future? And over half of individuals say that their studio is planning to always work from home as of 2023. We see 25% say hybrid work, 11% being to be determined, and 3.4% saying no, the intention is return to 5 days a week. Looking over on the right hand side, we're just comparing those categories across all 3 years again. And what I find interesting about this is we see a 21% increase in individuals reporting that their studio is determining that they're going to always work from home now, as compared to 2022. And then also compare that to 2021, where that percentage was at 14%. And the kind of inverse, you can see the inverse here with the to be determined category. Whereas in 2021, we had 58% of individuals saying that their studio hadn't decided yet. We now see only 11% of studios this year saying they haven't decided their official policy yet. So these studios are making up their minds. A lot of them are saying it's going to be working from home from now on. Um, and we've even just seen a decrease in the intention to return to a 5 day work week as well. So if this trend continues, it could be safe to say that work from home is here to stay. So, how many days on average, though, do you normally work from home? And individuals said about 65% of you said 5 days a week. So, a full work week spent at home, with a variety of small percentages across the other options, with only 4% of individuals working in the office and the other about 20% saying that they do some variety of hybrid work. This year, we also asked you, where is your physical office? And 26% of individuals said it's in the same city as where they live. The second biggest category, surprisingly, is in a different region, that being a state or province, but in the same country at 24%. Um, the next biggest category is in a different city, but in the same region. And then finally, our smallest category is in a different country at 11% of respondents. So responsibility can be done from. And this is just seeing hundreds of reported from also this job title, which is on the left, or which job responsibilities on the right hand side. And we can see a job title and responsibilities on the week mark, and with the responsibilities on the next days or as well. Once again, producers being a low sample size, the all individuals they work 5 days a week. Uh, home. Things technically nine. Uh, uh, or that's how many to move up, and about a third of in this year zero, followed by one time at 31, almost another third. And that last third of respondents is parsed out between 2 to 9 times. That's a lot. That's a lot of times. It's quite an adventure. So let's take that though and see number of times moved to work at a studio by the number of studios worked to get a good idea about to give a good milestone, let's say, on uh, how many studios you've worked and how many times you would on average expect to move for said studio. So we can see it's only when we get to the 2 studios work that we see an average of 1 move. Then going all the way until 5 studios work, do we see an average above 2 moves to work at a new studio? But after that, we get to 6 studios worked, which is 3, and all the way to 8, which is nearly 5 studios worked. Now we had categories beyond that, but there was low data in terms of visualization for that. And finally, for work from home, I took the time to everybody's further and just to get a better idea on the overall sentiment and do some qualitative analysis on the free response people gave about work from home and their opinions on it. And the most, the best way and might be the most obvious way to categorize these by is positive sentiment towards work from home and negative sentiment towards work from home. But through that, I tried to find the best categories and overall themes within those 2 sentiments um, to exhibit why individuals may like or dislike working from home. And for the positive sentiment people, the people who said they enjoy working from home, these include the fact that work from home lowers the barrier of industry entry. We had quite a few individuals this year say that it was due to work from home that they were allowed to work remotely and get into the video game industry. Um, Individuals also said they felt that they had a higher agency over their income or their wage. They felt that their wage was set more comprehensively due to being work from home. Uh, there is a larger market of opportunities for individuals that work from home. A lot of individuals that really just said, if the policy of work from home goes away, I will quit because I feel capable of finding another job. Um, and individuals who liked work from home also stated a more balanced or controlled social interactions in the workplace, and also a more balanced and controlled work life balance. Now, for individuals who said that they dislike working from home, they uh, reported reasons such as a less balanced social work social interactions and a less balanced work life balance. They also, as related to that, reported feelings of social isolation. They also reported having less agency over their own work. And related to that, they stated that there were difficulties with spontaneous or otherwise with collaboration. Specifically in that theme itself, that relates to getting onto Slack or getting people together for a meeting. A lot of individuals stated that they did not feel the spontaneity and collaboration that they expected when they came into the games industry. However, regardless of sentiment, and I think this is important, both groups on the majority advocated that the option to work in office or from home or in hybrid should be available to everybody. Some individuals touched upon the fact that their studios actually have already implemented this system, either by keeping their full office space that they've rented even pre work from home, or changing their office and work environment, physical in-person work environment to a rented desk space in like a WeWork, for example, company. Alrighty, let's get into workplace environment. A lot of factors here, and we're going to start off with some factors about time. So first off, time off options. This is just for 2023. Starting with the right-hand side, we can see paid holidays was the highest reported time off option available, followed by PTO, limited PTO, I should say, followed by mental health and bereavement, followed by sick days that were unlimited, I should say, followed by family leave, paid time off unlimited, and then unpaid time off limited. Average hours worked per week look pretty good this year, as the majority of individuals worked either 50 or less hours per week, meaning hopefully that means we're not seeing as much crunch as we've had in the past, and people are getting a more healthy work life balance as a result. Kind of abstracting on the topic of time here, how reasonable is your project scope on average? And for this, majority of respondents, over 50% in fact, responded that their scope on average is pretty reasonable, with about 25% in the neutral category, and then 20-ish percent in the uh, unreasonable categories, the two on the left. So, how reasonable is your project schedule, though, considering how reasonable your scope is? And once again, we see overall individuals state that their project schedule is quite reasonable, with that over 50% on the right two categories there. We have 28% at the neutral category, and then we have less than 20% in the negative or unreasonable categories to the left. So here we have changes in the engines used. So what engines were used in 2023? Well, as you can see here, Unreal finally hit the 50% mark in terms of reported engine use, followed by an assortment of proprietary engines, such as, well, just for an example, Frostbite, let's say. Um, Unity follows after proprietary at 11.8%, and then other at 0.6%. Now let's compare that across years though, and let's focus on the right two categories. So with proprietary, first off, we can see there's been a steady decrease in the amount of individuals reporting that they're using a proprietary engine. With that, we actually see a steady increase over the years in the amount of individuals in 21 at that 36.7%, and 50. We also see a decrease overall and actually others pretty stable. So that's engines, but let's also talk about DCCs. Which DCCs are being used in 2023? The overwhelming majority of individuals said Maya, followed by Motion Builder, then Blender, and then 3ds Max and Houdini. Now, just some background on this question. This was another select all apply because individuals may use multiple DCCs on the same project or in the studio. But looking at DCCs used 2021 2023, we see that Maya has stably been the overwhelming majority choice of DCC, followed by Motion Builder, then 3ds Max, then Blender. And an interesting thing with Houdini is that's made kind of a comeback from past years, from 0.6% in 2021 to unreported in 2022, and all the way up to 11.8% this year. So we talked about a bit of those tools and the workflows that go with them, but let's talk about training and how that relates to DCC and Engine. So what kind of training, work training is provided to you? And over 50% of individuals said that they receive video training while at work. 40% reported getting one-on-one mentorship within their team, probably from a peer or a lead. 25% reported going to professional conferences to further their skills. 14.9% reported having one-on-one mentorships outside of their team. Well, how useful are these opportunities? What quality would you all rate these training opportunities? And for the most part, individuals rated it as uh, relatively useful. That being said, 31% of individuals also said, yeah, it's all right. It's neutral. But I think what is nice here, though, is that not many individuals are saying that the training that they receive is not useful at all, or just a bit above not useful. So, does your work though cover the cost for these opportunities? And for the most part, yes, work fully compensates these opportunities for individuals who respond to the survey with either full or almost full compensation being in the 70% range, as compared to not compensated at all at 13.2 and just above not compensated at all at 6.6%. So let's look at work-life balance itself, and let's see how that changes over 21 to 23. So how's your work-life balance? It's looking pretty good. We have that 68% of individuals saying that it's either very balanced or close to being very balanced. And we're seeing only 2.7% at that not balanced at all. Looking at that over 21 to 2023, we see that this year we have the highest reported amount of individuals saying that their work-life balance is very balanced, and we are also seeing the lowest amount of individuals saying that their work-life balance is not balanced at all or very close to being not balanced at all. So I take that as a good sign. That's encouraging. Let's also do the same thing, but for job satisfaction. We can see a majority of individuals reported that their job satisfaction isn't necessarily being very satisfied with their job, but very close to it. In fact, if you look on the right-hand side, that 2021, 2023, we see the highest amount of individuals over the past 3 years reporting that their job is close to being very satisfied. And we see the identical amount of individuals as compared from 21 to 23 reporting that they are in fact very satisfied. So both work-life balance and job satisfaction both seem to be very high this year as compared to the last 2 years, which is great. Now let's take a sidestep into job finding and retention. And as you can see across the 3 years here, we have seen a steady increase in the amount of jobs, amount of new jobs people have gotten per year, starting with only 22% of respondents in 21, going all the way to 34.8% in 2023. So the highest amount of new jobs, but why did these individuals leave their jobs? And the largest reason is that they found a new job that provided better pay, followed by frustrations with the studio that they were working at. Uh, New job provided a clearer path for career growth, creative stagnation, frustrations with animation team leadership. New job provided better remote, and then the second smallest category, laid off, which I found interesting considering current news trends in terms of tech and game companies laying off individuals. We're seeing only about 4.4%, at least in that January to February section of the year, reporting that they left their last job due to being laid off. Then we also see wanted to live in a different location, 4.4% as well, and harassment being the smallest category at 2.4%. So we've also asked the question this year, how many layoffs over your career happened due to studio closures? And we can see for the majority of individuals, that's never happened. 67% of individuals said they've had zero layoffs due to this, but we do have a range going up to 5 times, which is about 2 people actually, in that 5 category on the right hand side. And now let's get into leadership. So, who's on your team leadership wise? Starting from the bottom, we see 65% of individuals say they have a lead animator, 47% of individuals say they have an animation director, 35% of individuals say they have a lead technical animator, 23% of individuals say they have an animation producer, 21% of individuals say they have a technical animation director, 15% of individuals say they have a lead animator programmer, 13% of individuals say they have an animation outsource manager, 9% of individuals say that they have an animation people manager, and then 4.7% of individuals say they have an people that are a large majority of individuals either talk to them daily or weekly. And what is the quality of those interactions? And for most people, they report it as being either close to excellent or excellent in terms of their change. That's great. Does leader and the majority of individuals say about 70 percent actually say that it's either close to being very much so or very much so their leadership represent you and your experiences. Further analysis would be interesting in to seeing the demographics and other factors for individuals in that not at all to close to not at all range. So, does your leadership advocate for your craft though? And very close to the question above, we see kind of the same distribution here, where most individuals say it's either they're either very confident in the fact that their leadership does advocate for their craft, or they are very confident. With a very low amount of individuals saying that they're not confident at all about their leadership's ability to advocate for their craft. And who promotes your career growth. And the highest category here at over 50% is an individual's lead, then followed by their director, their career manager, and finally, the producer they work most closely with, who is responsible for your schedule and scope. And we can see actually that most individuals say that their schedule and scope is kind of a 50-50 effort between their lead and director director and their producer. However, more individuals lean closer to lead and director than individuals did towards their producer. So, confidence across levels of leadership. We also asked about your confidence in your team, project, and higher level leadership. And we can see here that for team leadership, people are highly confident in them. Looking at the right hand side, that category four and the very much so category, we see the highest scores are being kept in confidence in team leadership. Uh, and we see confidence in higher level leadership and confidence in project leadership actually decreasing. Whereas if we go the opposite direction to the other side of the graph, we see more individuals reporting that they have a low confidence in their project leadership and higher level leadership than they have low confidence in their team leadership. And to aggregate that into just averages per category, we can see the same thing just without cross sectioning the data. We see team leadership is the highest on average overall, followed by project leadership, then followed by higher level leadership. However, we see them all within that 3 to 4 range, which is good. Alrighty, worries, excitements, and struggles. So, what are we worried about in the future or for the future? And we implemented a new category this year, machine learning and AI. And I think it catches people's eyes the most when they see this graph, being the largest worry, with 42% of individuals saying they are worried about this topic. That's followed by production, and then by culture, external development, unionization efforts, and the rest. What about excitements about the future? We see people are most excited about creativity and new creative directions that can come with the future. Um, we also see, and I should mention this, that 29% of individuals are in fact excited about machine learning and AI. We see that workflows and community follow that, as well as unionization efforts, production, and external development. Also noting that production is second to lowest here. So, worries versus excitements. This is just a way to visualize the differences across worries and excitements, but within the same categories. And let's get into the struggles. So, we can see at the studio level, people said that their studios struggled with production the most. So, 48% of individuals say that there was a struggle at the studio level with production. We see that followed by tech, then by hiring, then by knowledge sharing, creativity and creativeness, compensation, leadership, capture, outsource, and culture. Oh, my bad. So, looking at industry struggles, the first place changes a bit to compensation. People are worried about the global topic on a global scale of compensation, but that's still followed by production, which is the second largest industry struggle, then by culture, then by hiring, knowledge sharing, leadership, creative, tech, outsource, and capture. So, looking at comparing those across the studio level and the industry level, we can see that some topics are far outstrip themselves in terms of the differences at the studio struggle and the industry struggle, or the industry level, I should say, such as tech, where people are more worried about their own studio struggles with tech as they are with the industry as a whole. Or we can see the inverse with compensation, uh, where less people believe that their studio is struggling with compensation, and that industry, in fact, is struggling with compensation as a whole. But then we also have topics like production, which caught my eye because it is both rated highly in both studio level and industry level struggles, and they're about at the same amount. And so people feel mm, in equal proportions worried about their own studio as they do the industry in terms of production, which leads us into our final section. Further exploration. We're going to be investigating struggles this year. So I spent a bit of time looking at that production struggles just right now. And like I said before, production ranked high on worries about the future. It ranked high at the studio level of struggles, and it ranked high at industry level struggles. And studio and industry production struggles, like I said, were reported at similar levels. Uh, Also, production ranked low on excitement about the future. So there's overall kind of a negative sentiment towards production in general. And because it seemed rather strong in this sentiment, we thought this would be a good area to look further into. So before we went all out and tried to figure out the problem with studio production struggles, and we're looking at studio for this instead of studio and industry, just because studio is more directly affected by other factors we recorded in the survey. Um, well, we wanted to look at studio production struggles, and we wanted to see how they impacted first people's work-life balance and job satisfaction, which in the past we've used as metrics to determine just overall quality of work life in like last year's survey. So first off, this is work-life balance and production struggles. As you can see on the right-hand side, I have grouped individuals who reported no production struggles at the studio level and people who did report that. And we can see that their work-life balance on average changes by that 0.27%. But let's run some analysis on that. Let's actually see if that difference is statistically significant. So I conducted a two-way ANOVA. NOVA is just a type of analysis that allows us to say with statistical confidence if the difference in averages is expected to be seen across multiple samples of the same individuals. Work-life balance we looked at work-life balance between production struggles and no production struggles, and that difference that we said, that 0.27 points, is statistically different. It is statistically significantly different between individuals who reported no production struggles and individuals who reported production struggles. So another way of saying this is people who reported no production struggles reported a higher work-life balance. And I repeated this process again with job satisfaction. Here we can see we have a 0.38 difference on average between no production struggles and production struggles in terms of job satisfaction. And once again, we see that this difference is statistically significant and that individuals who report having no production struggles have a higher job satisfaction on average. So we see now that production struggles do impact quality of life, but we need to investigate the data now a bit more. Who's reporting these production struggles? How is it related to other factors? And which factors can we find in the survey that can be identified as potentially contributing to studio level production struggles? Well, the overall goal of the stage then is to identify the key differences between those who did not report production struggles and those who did report them at, once again, the studio level. So I broke the demographics down into the job titles here, which positions are reporting production struggles. And on the left-hand side, we can see percentages within each job title. So let's say, for example, 43% of animators and people who said that they're only animators reported production struggles. And we see that 40% go all the way from animator to technical animator. But then we see a large jump in lead and directors. And all of a sudden, we're seeing 63% of lead and directors, which is about, well, it is 20% larger than, let's say, the animators, um, are reporting production struggles at the studio level. And then if we look over to the right-hand side, because bear in mind, people who reported as only animators made up a larger portion of the overall survey, as did the lead and directors, we still see lead and directors being a relatively smaller amount of individuals, still representing 30% of individuals in the total studio struggles and production uh, reporting amount. So 30.8% of individuals who, in other words, 30 30.8% of individuals uh, who reported that there are studio struggles in production were also lead directors. So, where are production struggles being reported, though? Because this is another angle we can maybe look at. Maybe it's a West Coast centric phenomenon. Maybe it's like Washington. Maybe it's SoCal, that kind of idea. But when going through this data, I went through it per state, then per country, and then per region as like the continent level. And I found that reports of studio level struggles were relatively equal across regions. Admittedly, we had limited data in some regions, but when you got to that continent level, it, most of these areas reported that 40 to 48% of individuals reporting that there were production struggles. And what this really says is that this is not necessarily geographically related if we're seeing the same proportion of struggles in different areas. Um, okay, but what factors are related to production struggles? Well, one thing that was confusing me at the time of doing this investigation was I was thinking back on scope and schedule, those questions that we talked about previously, and how they were rated as largely reasonable this year. A lot of individuals were said it was either close to being reasonable or in fact very reasonable. And so I made the decision just to do a quick correlation between scope, schedule, and production struggles at the studio level, just to see if the data visualization itself was just fooling me a bit, and maybe the actual statistical trend showed that, in fact, there was something surprising going on. Well, no. As expected, there was a strong negative correlation between scope and schedule and production issues. Uh, that being to say that in another way, when scope and or schedule was rated more reasonable, the likelihood of production being rated as a studio level struggle tended to decrease significantly. The higher or the more reasonable your scope, the less likely you're to say that there's a studio level production struggle. Um, so I expanded a bit and I looked at average hours worked per week. And as we saw, most individuals reported working either 50 or less hours a week. So I didn't have much faith with that one going into it, but there wasn't much correlation. There was not a strong, significant correlation between hours worked per week and production struggles. So it's not time related. So what is the missing link? And I was a bit stumped for a bit, but then I was reading through the open ended questions and people's sentiments on these struggles, and a lot of people actually talked about production. And some answers pointed towards leadership positions. And that got me thinking a bit. So I pulled from the survey a lot of items, a lot of factors that could be put into an exploratory logistic regression and pit them against each other to see what comes out of it, to see what are significant predictors of whether or not someone reports a production struggle or not. What a logistic regression is a form of regression. I've done that in the past looking at job satisfaction in last year's survey, but it's a form of regression which takes a binary outcome. For an example, if someone reported a production struggle or didn't report a production struggle, and estimates the probability of the binary outcome occurring based on whichever variables are entered in as a predictor. Now, it's a mouthful, but really for an example, you can really just look at this one here, predicting whether a person will be accepted or rejected into a graduate program. So that's our binary outcome, accepted or not, based on their GPA, which is the independent variable, also known as a predictor. So each predictor gets an estimated likelihood, which is just a value that tells you how many times more likely or just more likely or unlikely the outcome will happen or not happen based on the value of the predictor. And I'll show you what that means in a second. So the overall idea in looking for variables to put in our logistic regression is to achieve that statistical significance in predicting whether an individual will report a studio level struggle in production. But the idea is to think of factors and variables that are in our survey that actually affect or could have a reasonable effect on production struggles. So variables that I selected ranged from the type of studio worked at, so AAA or indie or third party, for example, the size of the studio, so how many people work there, which leadership positions were reported as being on the team, the frequency with which one interacts with their team leadership, if the animation team works with an external partner as an outsourcing, as I figure that that could impact production, and whether the producer or lead director was responsible for schedule and scope, as we talked about previously. Well, out of the 10 plus variables entered into this multiple analyses and entering these variables in different combinations and in different sets across multiple logistic regression analyses, the only variable after all of these that significantly predicted the likelihood of reporting studio production struggles was whether the individual had an animation producer on their team. I'll get back to this chi-square part in a second. Um, So we found that having an animation producer on the team significantly predicted whether an individual reports if there is a production struggle at their studio. However, the result is a bit what you wouldn't expect. If one did have an animation producer on their team, they were 2 times more likely to report that there was a production struggle at their studio than an individual that did not report having an animation producer on their team. So again, I entered this variable with many other variables that would help account for things like studio size, studio type, other leadership positions being present, and other work environment factors. Just because when I saw this, I thought, okay, well, let's check this for maybe it's studio size actually, or maybe it's the type of studio. But this significance of this predictor and its direction, that being that it makes people or that two people are 2 times more likely to report there's a production struggle issue, it didn't go away. Um, However, it should be noted with this model that I created that the classification index, basically the accuracy of the logistic regression model, uh, in terms of predicting if someone will or will not have a studio level production struggle, was hovering at about 60%, 65 at the highest. Um, what this really tells us is that while this is an interesting finding and while this variable does in fact stay significant, even in the presence of other variables like you control for things like studio size, there are still other factors out there that were not captured in the current survey that contribute to the likelihood of reporting if there are production struggles in the studio beyond those factors estimated in the model, namely whether or not there is a animation producer on the team. Now, I ended up doing a follow-up chi-square to make sure this result was correct, and I wasn't just seeing something as a result of biased or skewed data. And this is just a simple chi-square, which is a form of ANOVA. And I found that within individuals that reported having an animation producer, 63.2% reported having a production struggle in their team. The inverse of that being the 36.8% reported no struggle, whereas 43.9% of individuals that don't have an animation producer on their team reported having a production struggle, whereas 56% of those individuals reported no struggle. So the proportions are reversed between those two groups and whether or not they reported a production struggle. So that's just one struggle, though, and we'd be remiss if we stopped there. So we elected to choose two other struggles to look at the studio level, starting with creative struggles and then tech struggles. So, creative struggles, the demographics for this one look a quite a bit different. We don't have any very large outliers in terms of proportion within each job title. In fact, we have the opposite. We see programmers are within programmers. We only see 11% of them saying that there is a creativity struggle, but it makes sense. At least I feel that it would make sense with the programmers specifically. That is not a call out. Sorry. um, we see that within the entire amount of individuals that reported creative struggles, 65% of them are actually reported as being only animators. And we see a smaller proportion as we did from production struggles. We see only 20% of individuals this time around as lead directors and 13% technical animators, 1% being programmers, and 0% being outsource managers and producers. I conducted the same exploratory logistic regression approach that I went through with the studio level production struggles and found that using the same variables and using the same approach of recombining and creating different sets of variables over multiple analyses, that not a single variable in this data set actually achieved significance in predicting the likelihood of reporting whether there was a creative struggle in the studio. This is a bit of a unexpected finding, actually. You would imagine at least one variable would. And this is something I would like to talk with the roundtable about a bit further on. So going through the same process with tech struggles, we see for tech struggles a pretty equal proportion within each job title reported tech struggles. So around that 40 to just 50% range with no producer, none of the three of them saying that there was a tech struggle. But looking at who is reporting tech struggles, we can see once again the largest proportion of individuals being people who are only animators who responded as being only animators, followed once again by lead directors, then technical animators, then programmers, then outsource managers, then producers. So, doing the same exploratory logistic regression approach, we found that the size of the studio and whether there was a technical animation director on the team significantly predicted the likelihood of reporting a tech struggle in the studio. So, specifically for every 1 point increase in studio size on the scale that we used, so that was an average increment of 50 employees additional, 50 to 100 employees additional per increment on our scale on our survey. Well, with that 1 point increase, we see that it is 1.17 times more likely that tech will be reported as a struggle in the studio. So the larger the studio, the more likely tech is reported tech is reported as a struggle. But looking at technical animation director, if there is a technical animation director reported as being on the team, the likelihood of reporting tech as a struggle in the studio decreases by 0.477 times. So decreases by about, I believe, 60%. That being said, I will just point out with this model that it reports around the same classification accuracy as the production model. So once again, hovers around 60%. There are still other factors not being accounted for that lend to the likelihood of predicting or the likelihood of reporting, that tech was a struggle in the studio or not. So just to recap, studio production struggles, leads and directors disproportionately report production struggles as compared to other titles. They contribute to 30% of the total individuals reporting production struggles. Geographic data showed little differences in production struggle rates when accounting for the sample density per area. Studio production struggles are highly reported, despite schedule and scope being reported as largely reasonable, and the correlation did show that the more reasonable your scope and schedule is, the less likely you're going to report production struggle. And studio production struggles seem most associated, at least the variables that we have present, with the presence of an animation producer on the team. There's a 2 times higher likelihood of reporting a studio production struggle when present, though this relationship is moderated by the low accuracy of the model. And and with that fact, there just points to the fact that there are other contributing factors not addressed in the investigation/survey. Uh, for creative/tech struggles, both creative and tech studio level struggles exhibited more equal portions of struggle reporters within each job title, and creative struggles was the most represented by animators beyond both production and tech struggles. Uh, for tech struggles, the size of the studio and whether there was a technical animation director and team significantly predicted the likelihood of reporting a tech struggle in the studio. However, no variable from the set used across all 3 analyses significantly predicted the likelihood of an individual reporting a creative struggle in the studio. So finally, some further questions. What factors in the workplace contribute to leads and directors to report production as a struggle at a higher proportion than their counterparts? If it is not scope, schedule, or time related, then what other factors contribute to the overall high rate of reported studio level production struggles? Why does the presence of an animation producer indicate a higher likelihood of reporting a multiple level production struggle? So multiple hypotheses might be conjectured about this. The model only indicates, though, the likelihood, and I need to stress this as much as I can, does not imply causation. Uh, so no variables could be identified as significant predictors of creative struggles. Studio size, type, team leadership, composition, leadership interaction, scope, and schedule, and outsourcing were all investigated in this struggles logistic model. But could it be maybe DCC and engine related? Or could it perhaps be the standards and coherency of the animation practices within respective teams as well? Uh, Creative struggles were largely reported by animators, and I would love to hear more from their experiences about this and to get a better, more qualitative and holistic idea of what's happening there. So, as we come to a close with this AnimState of the industry, the 4th one, I just want to talk about a few things. Uh, this is kind of representing a little bit of a shift in the AnimState of the industry focus. We're continuing to report the important and dynamic trends across legacy topics and upcoming topics as well. But we also want to allow a bit more space and time in the presentation and report to conduct deeper analyses like the one just given above and in doing so, foster better understanding of the statistics reported. And this is kind of a departure from just going through bar graph after bar graph after bar graph and getting a bit more deeper into our investigations. This also includes free response, I do read everybody's free responses, and they're always so extremely insightful and highly appreciated. I quite love them. And as such, future surveys will be more tailored towards those directed insights. We'll still be talking about the important, reoccurring, and dynamic topics to do follow-ups with our years of data on them, but we will be also asking more directed questions into certain areas. However, this is always a survey by you and for you, and as such, please send feedback, take the feedback survey, and tell us what you want investigated and what to include on next year's iteration, as this is data from you as well. So, most importantly, please keep spreading the word about the work we do with the AnimState of the industry. And as we move forward, we just are going to be shifting tactics a bit and how we get that word out there. And you can be a great help with that as well. One last thing before I forget. In the future, we're going to be doing a investigation into workplace environment. Notifications for that will go out, but that is going to be a actual journal published paper, and we would love your involvement and participation with that as well. Thank you very much. Hi. I hope everyone enjoyed that. Welcome to the Q&A after the presentation. We're just going to go through some questions that everybody has here, as well as go over some questions from the audience as well. Yeah. So I think I would just like to kick it off here and look at some of the questions that I posited at the end, because these are also questions I've been thinking about a lot as developing. And then we can get, I saw Soul with your hand
Well, I
raised.
just saying we might want to introduce ourselves too.
Oh, that would also be really good. Yeah. Sorry, I've been talking for an hour straight.
No, it's just some random people that we just pulled off the street. What do they think?
Yeah. As everyone knows, my name's Adam Clark. I've been talking for the past hour. Soul, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Saul Brennan. I am a rigger at Heart Machine. Emily.
Cool. Harvey Newman. I am a animator, mission director, YouTuber, many things.
All the things.
All the things.
Hi, my name is Emily Katske, and I'm an animation lead at Bungie.
Awesome. I'm really happy to have everybody here. As we saw just a second ago, Emily has a lot of great questions, and I'm very excited about that. Just starting off though, let's pull one of the questions from the for the questions section of the presentation. So one of the things I was actually curious about going through the production struggles was, what do you think in the lead and directors to report production as a struggle at a higher proportion than their counterparts? So why are they reporting it more than others?
Yeah, this was a question. The one thing that I figured would be better capture in the next survey is like what classifies a production, like different what production is and what we said. And as you said, like it's in directors, what means the people and stuff like that. So I think that's our big bit of data, one of our big misses with data. What do they classify? Because as you said, it's not scope, right? Or it is, but it's not. There's people that still reporting it, even with that correlation of like scope and work-life balance. Is like, what is it then?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. There is. It's a very nebulous thing. Production struggles, right? It can mean a lot of things. It could be with the actual schedule, with that scope. It could be even just the stress, the lingering stress. Does your team size fit with the scope and schedule? You know, as a lead or director, it kind of becomes a broader question of the overall project and less of like the individual moment to moment necessarily. So it's very open-ended.
So I've been fortunate to work with quite a few producers over a few studios as a director and a lead. And I think, and here I'm going to be the devil's advocate a little bit, and I think that the problem, at least that I suffered from working with producers, there's brilliant producers out there. I just want to make sure that, giving them a shout out. But it becomes very much like a little bit of a type of war sometimes as you are in production, because you are an animation director and you have to lead your team to actually do their best work possible. You also have to distribute tasks, right? Now, depending on the studio, production can come along and actually disrupt the work that you're doing behind the scenes. So because of that disruption, sometimes there's a little bit of clash. And more specifically, and a lot of people don't really truly understand how and that actually comes about many of these things and why they take so long. If that makes sense.
No, that does. It was kind of one of the things I was thinking about as like a cause. The finding with that logistician just being like, wow, I would never have expected that 2 times likelihood in reporting just because that there's this position, this producer on the team. And that was one of the things I was thinking about with that. And I just think you're pretty right with it. I was also just thinking, like, could it be like even just having a production person on the team makes people realize that there are more inherent production problems that are just not being addressed. Like having someone to be like, this is a production problem, this is a production problem. And then people go, oh, wait, this is. And I wanted to get y'all's thoughts on this one because, yeah.
So I wanted to also add, because that's a really good point, right? So the further along you are in development, and when project starts slipping, right, and things get out of hand, that normally the very first port of action and answers is production, right? Because animators, artists, the artists, they're doing pretty things. So production comes along a lot of the times to actually be militant about we need to get these things done within a certain amount of time. So the further along you are in production, the more that sense of like ownership sometimes get pulled away from you, and then production has to come in and intervene, right? That also is another factor within this reasoning of like directors not being like happy with producers.
It also
There is a wee bit of data. Oh, sorry.
no.
There is a wee bit of data that contradicts that, though, I think, because we had the data that said people were very satisfied with their team leadership, and then we had the data that said their leads are more responsible for scope and task distribution than production is. So I'm wondering if a lot of the production like problems are external from animation, like other departments, basically, that are impacting animation. So it could be like from, like, I don't know, writing, or it could be from design or something like that. It's not necessarily to do with their team and their scope, that it seems external. But that also goes back to like, what was said earlier, which was, in my experience in game development, everyone loves to blame each other constantly. It's always just passing the buck around, right? And production is just the easiest target. So I'm also wondering, like, how much is it perceived production and how much of it is actual production? And then again, how much power does production have within their studio versus, like, I've been in studios where production is heavily involved with leadership and like actually informing them and telling them this is in scope or this isn't out in scope. And then I've been in studios where production are literally just like, set out to spread the word and enforce it, but have like literally no ability to change things.
So that's a really interesting point. I'm really glad you brought that up, Sol. Something that was kind of buzzing in my head was, I don't necessarily know if it's the animation producer's fault so much as it could be the need for an animation specific producer rather than say like a cinematics producer or a gameplay producer. It's like, is this perhaps maybe like a red herring or something? It's a larger problem than just the producer. And then also something else that you mentioned, Sol, is it's kind of the eternal creative struggle, right? As a creative, there's that phrase that's like, work is not finished, just abandoned. And a producer comes along and says, update your JIRA tickets and you only have this amount of time because we have to deliver a game. As a creative, you're like, I'm not ready yet. I need I just see something here. So, I'm not saying it's not a problem perhaps, but I think there's an inherent dynamic and struggle between the need for a deadline and the artist wanting to just keep going. So there's a couple things. I think it's complicated, is I guess what I'm getting at, and agreeing with you still as well.
Yeah. It's a topic I'm really excited to look more into and develop more questions about in the future, especially what you were talking about, Emily, with that idea, the almost red herring, with just having like, because when we were talking about the composition of what leadership is on the team, only so many producer roles that we asked about. So we don't know if it's going to be the cinematics producer. We don't know if we same effect across different producer roles as well. And if we do, what does that mean about production as a whole would be the next step. And yeah, not to get too ahead of everything.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if we could also gauge people's, like, I don't know. Obviously, you don't want to introduce bias into surveys, but at the same time, maybe get people to think a little bit more critically about why they're saying a thing. Because I don't know, it's always that thing where like you blame someone and then you actually like talk to the person involved, or or learn more about the thing that you're blaming, and you're like, oh yeah, I kind of see why this is difficult, and
Oh yeah.
why you're put in this hard place. And so it's one of those things where, because we've had, I've been in a ton of studios where we've had internal surveys and people just, or postmortems, and people just pour their hearts out into paper. And it's like a lot of things sometimes they're, they're venting out over are things that they also don't have full understanding of all the factors that affected that. And maybe it might also be like a lack of communication that they just don't know about, right? It might, maybe it's not production, but it's overall a lack of transparency within the studio that's causing the issue.
Yeah, I really do agree with that as well. And I'm not a game developer. My fiance is a game developer, so I just hear the war stories from secondhand. But yeah, that makes sense.
So, like what Saul mentioned, makes complete sense. I really think that there's a big factor here that pretty much every single studio has a certain like way of putting people together. Some are more like let the artists do their thing, and the producing department is very little. Some are actually the opposite. The bigger the studio, normally the bigger, the heavier end of the producer. Having said that, they have one job, producers, and they'll do it absolutely brilliant. And somebody needs to organize things. And yeah, like artists, we like to go about our own business while basically making the best game possible, best arts ever. And I completely understand. So when I'm trying to analyze the producers, they actually have one job, and it's basically a job of organizing things. So the lack of understanding of what each role entails sometimes can be a big problem, right? Because you go like, I'm going to do my thing, leave me alone. Producers go, but you need to give me more information. Why is this not done? And then it can become a bit of a rift between the two departments, right? And this is maybe what you see with people not being happy with production. If that makes sense.
That does make sense. Yeah.
Another thing is, we said animation producer, but we didn't say specifically if they understand animation. Like, I know we said how much does your leadership understand what you do, but you didn't exactly cover whether production understands it. So there's a difference between a producer assigned to your department, who's your animation producer, versus a producer who actually understands the ins and outs of animation, and whether that is actually helpful, like more helpful. Because in my experience, I've had producers that have been assigned to my teams that have no knowledge of what we do, and it's really not a good. It's a bad use of their skills, but it's also very frustrating for the people on the team because they're like having to explain their jobs, and it's not fair. It's not fair that someone is assigned to something that they just don't really have any understanding or knowledge of, especially if you're in the middle of production and they just have to keep running. So yeah, I would be interested if there's a way for us to mine data to see whether there's also a lack of understanding coming from production on what they do or what is needed, for the teams themselves.
No, definitely. And I just wanted to say even more plainly, as I didn't get a chance in the survey, this is not dragging producers. You're welcome, valued members of the studio, obviously. Oh my God.
No, this is the anti-producer. We're just going to make it that.
No.
We love producers.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah. Just getting that result was just a big, this might be problematic reporting.
I mean, I will be honest. I've been in studios, like this is a bit from the side, but I've been in studios where I've not had a producer at all, and I've been in a studio where, studio situations where I've had a producer and they just line everything out for me, and it's great, right? And
Yep.
yeah, I will say I've been significantly less stressed in the studios where I've actually had a good producer.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to give a big shout out to Fawn. So she was my animation producer, and she comes from film. Right, she worked in Hardman and all those other studios. And film actually, the producers that actually are knowledgeable about the department in order to actually make the department run better, which is something that I think we can learn a lot in games, right? And we were struggling. We had a big team, and we basically needed somebody to keep us on the straight and narrow, right? And Fawn came along, knowing animation, knowing how to deal with animators, because sometimes can be very specific, and basically made everything better for us, right? And this is basically because she understands the pipeline, understands what animators need. And so there is such a thing as Saul was mentioning of having a producer that understands what the department is to achieve, and also understands how long things take, and can put those things into a pipeline, into words, and make sure that the schedule is correct.
Okay. Okay.
Did you, when you were checking the producing thing, did you do a cross between whether people reported that it was production was done or scoping and scheduling was done by their leads or by a production team?
I entered that one into the logistic regression to account for that, to see if there was if it actually changed the significance of whether or not there was a animation producer on the team in terms of predicting the production struggle, and it did not change the significance of the uh, whether or not there was a animation producer on the team.
Oh no, I'm more specifically asking if
Mhm.
production as a department controlled the scheduling as a whole
Mhm.
versus your leadership, right? Because usually, like if you're in a team where your lead is your producer, but also the person who's involved with your career
Oh,
development and all this other stuff,
I see what
and
you
they're
mean.
balancing about a zillion hats, right? And so I'd be interested, like, because usually especially if someone's both a producer and like team manager and lead and director and all
Mhm.
those things,
Mhm.
usually they're not good at least one of those because they probably got pushed into that role because that's an impossible role to do.
Okay.
Especially at the bigger studios when you have like enormous teams. So yeah, I'd be curious to see like how much of it was not specifically animation production, but like how much of the scoping and handling of tasks was handled by production as a whole versus their own team or their own department.
Yeah, we did not ask that on this survey, but that is a very, very good point for future surveys. And just talking, like expanding more into the structure and hierarchy of the work environment in general in future surveys, I think we can start answering a lot more in-depth questions about this. Um, I did want to move on, if everyone's all right, from the production topic. Awesome. Um, and we can either take a question from chat, or if any of y'all have a good question or a burning question you want to ask, please go ahead.
Well, one thing I wanted to say, which I mean, maybe it's because we explored it in previous surveys, but there was a lack of exploration into diversity and any kind of correlations that had
Sure.
with certain things, and especially because it's still quite prudent because we still have this is leading into one of my other questions, which is there's still a massive mismatch between how people perceive their own studio versus how they perceive the industry, especially when it comes to culture. And like I was like people that answer are the majority, right? And so how does that cascade into other people having the more minority identities they have, or vice versa? Because like one of the ones was like creative struggles and why people have creative struggles, and my inkling is the teams you said the teams that were like more creative had creative struggles. Well, they're historically the ones that are usually a little bit more diverse because the people that have been able to come in from those careers have been in, like people, most people in programming stuff like that historically have been like cis white guys because that's what they've been pushed into, right? So I'm curious whether like the creative aspect has any kind of linking between and whether you or you don't feel yourself, or you feeling company because your identity isn't like, either you can't express that or people are not considerate of that around you. Yeah, that was just general, like throwing that out there.
No, it's definitely a field we need to get more into. Part of it too is I actually, surprisingly, I forgot to add that in, is that we're actually seeing a decrease this year in the amount of non-cisgendered individuals reporting as being in the games industry or just reporting on the survey in general. And that could come from a variety of reasons. I'd be remiss to say maybe we need to really step up on just diversity representation in general in upcoming surveys. But also, maybe there's also part of that too with just how we're also disseminating. We've been classically just doing a lot of posts on Twitter, getting hype that way on this survey, recent events. Anyway, not as many people are on Twitter as much as they have been as well, but there's a variety of reasons. And bottom line is also we just need to just do more with representation.
So, like, I would like to.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. So I would like to actually add to that.
Sure.
I absolutely agree. Like, it would be awesome to have more like studies and information about why lack of diversity, but like going in depth about trying to answer the questions about why the lack of diversity. Because I worked in a couple of companies that really tried their best and they struggled to actually find where to find the talent. So currently I'm working for a company that we have a really talented Nigerian coder. He's working from Nigeria, but the company had to go as far as Nigeria to find somebody that actually was diverse and talented in order to kind of like. So I think what companies are looking for, and they'll absolutely love you for this, is the reasons why, or the places where you can find this thing, and the barriers to get to the people. And the people are watching this thing because if you're an animator, if you're a coder, if you're a producer, you're actually kind of like watching these kind of surveys. So I think it's going to be very interesting to know those.
Well, to add to that, statistically, I wouldn't be surprised that people are dropping out because there was a report or something released, I think, or like an article released like a month back that said something like 40% of diversity officers within companies have been laid off since 2020, and majority of them were like either black or brown, basically. So there's this whole effort of like after 2020 and George Floyd and everything like that of like pushing for diversity. It was all just a sham, right? It was all just a facade, right? And that's what I've experienced. I've seen that facade of like, and of like, oh yes, we care, but when it actually came down to the nitty gritty, they didn't give a shit. It was just so they would look good on the outside and they could talk about it. But when you actually said to them, this is how you could change things, this is how you could make it better, like we had actual organizations and collections of people that were literally coming up with ideas of those minority statuses, saying this is what would make our lives better at the company was like, oh, we can't do that, or that's not attainable, or just outright ignored it, or just waved it away, and it just lost the time. So the number of at least people going down, I wouldn't be surprised at the lack of diversity. Also trying to hire people is harder because now it's even more apparent after this, like how wide the gap is for a lot of, like how big the diversity issues are. If it was me, I mean, I kind of knew what I was getting into like X amount of years ago, but if I'd known about the depth of it, like, I don't know if I would have been stepping in quite the same, But yeah. Also maybe to do with the demographics and how we collect them. But like Twitter is Twitter, so that's also part of it.
It's probably just a small part of it, but I would prefer any alternative than the actual. Then I would prefer any alternative than the reason being that like people are just dropping out. That would be, if that is the true thing, that is terrible.
So, like, if I might say, Adam, like, I think your study and kind of like revealed a bunch of stuff that is incredibly, it's incredibly like powerful. So, for example, what you had about pay, about like the difference, right? Like how low people are getting paid and the quantity of people are getting paid and low salary, you know, like that stuff to me, I completely didn't know about it. So having something of that depth about diversity, I think will actually answer a lot of questions. Because I think we all know that something is off, and especially as a Black person, I know that things are off. I just don't know how off they are about like what's the numbers really. So putting those numbers on paper, I think will probably get everybody to really think twice about the hiring in their companies.
Yeah, definitely. And with that, that's going to be one of the next things we're going to talk about with the next surveys, and just retooling the demographic section completely, because we just need more descriptives, more geographical information. We need to retool also the salary as well, those questions, because we're talking about brackets, but we should probably start getting more direct estimates of individual salaries as well. But 100% is what I'm trying to say. It's a long way of saying I 100% agree with you.
Is that a reason why there wasn't sorry, just to finish that point, is that a reason why we didn't have a lot of breakdown? Because I know that we collected a lot of data on ethnicities and, you know, and minority statuses. That was all in the questionnaire. So we could have done some correlation or some analysis against things like salary and stuff like that. But was it just the data wasn't good enough this time round?
No. So we had the one question on ethnicity. We have one question with being set apply or free response that are for gender, and fully talking about the proportions of individuals that reported to the survey, 76%. Sorry, I do not want to miss my words on this one. 74% cisgender and 72.8%, at least very small bracket in terms of individuals reporting to do statistically confident analyses as well. So with that, I do not just want to put up a simple data visualization, just be like, well, there's analyses for such an unimportant topic as well. But we got to do what we can, and we got to get this and get the survey out to more people as well, and reach more individuals in general, because at this part with that 72.5, for example, percent white, that's still leaving many other leaving that 28% of individuals from a 297% survey, a small amount of individuals coming from many different other ethnicities or combinations of ethnicities as well. Sorry, choked on my own words there for a second. So one of the things that I had done in the past is actually the full-time employment wage by ethnicity scale, and it followed the same format of doing year bracket, year bracket, year bracket, year bracket, and then seeing how it maps out and comparing that white versus person of color, doing it that way. One of the problems with doing it that way, and the same thing with gender, is there is very distressing cutoffs in terms of years worked. So, you know, you'll have your less than 1 year, 1 to 5 years, 6 to 7 years. But both, non-cisgendered individuals or cisgendered women or people of color, you're seeing it get what's called right censored, meaning it stops well before the other data points do. And that's also a problem. It's not limiting us completely, obviously, but it's the sparsity of data.
That also might be the truth, though.
Oh, it is.
Like
it could be.
The people are literally leaving, so the data is not there, or the people don't make it in terms of like they can't because the environment isn't conducive. I'm not saying it's like there must be data past those data points, but like
there is.
You know, if and I understand that like you can't do anything with those numbers because they are so they're not statistically significant enough to draw any real analysis from. especially on sensitive topics. But yeah, like I would suspect if you're seeing that drop off, it's because it's probably
Yeah,
a reality,
it is.
you know.
I don't want to mince words with this. It probably is. But with that, I mean, we can show that, but we also want to show more, and that's really what I meant about that. Is just we want to do more deeper analyses, and we need more people. But we can also say what's going on with this, like I said, right censoring of data. Why are we only seeing X group of individuals getting to this many years of experience, and why is their pay at that point? We can definitely do that. Yeah. Did we want to field another question?
Well, Emily, you were going to say something, weren't you?
Yeah, real quick, and then I think we do have some questions that I want to make sure we have time for. Harvey, started to mention that employees are pretty satisfied with their compensation, but it was still listed as a industry struggle. And we also saw that contract worker wages were pretty stagnant. And I wonder if, as an industry, we are worried about our contract workers and making sure that they can afford to live and survive and support themselves. I don't want to extrapolate too much. I just thought it was interesting, and perhaps I'm being a bit hopeful that we care about our workers more, even though we might be by and large, or at least the full-time employees are by and large satisfied with their compensation. Perhaps it's like reflecting outwards.
So with the compensation in general, and just with contract with contract employment, it is it's very interesting to see this change because we looked at this last year as well, and looked at compensation satisfaction last year for contractors specifically, and that was matching up very closely with full-time employment. But all of a sudden, we're seeing that this year with this change, and all of a sudden, the wages in general are reflecting once again the year of 2021. We're not seeing the same thing with contractor rates, which is just staying in this weird constant, even though that seems to be a entry point or a pipeline for individuals to get into full-time employment, and how long they need to spend in that area as well at a very frozen rate is concerning. Sorry, did that answer? Okay.
I think that might be it for questions, and I think we might be at time.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think that we're going to move on. I wish we could answer a question from the stream if there was one, but I don't know if we have time for that.
It's unfortunate. This is so fascinating. I feel like we could talk about it forever.
Super interesting.
Yeah, for real. I do want to end on one point.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was very heartening to see that one return to office was losing, like as a mandate, right? I think everyone should be able to choose. Hybridization is great. People should be able to go in. People should be able to stay at home. And companies should just work it out, right? But it was really good to see that trend going back down, because it started to creep up, and people have successfully pushed back. And on top of that, I'm very surprised to see some of these results as a game survey. I was like, people are working 40 hours a week, like mostly, like the trail off and like overtime, because your overtime compensation went down. That probably went down because people aren't working overtime, and that is fucking good. Like, that's amazing. And I do wonder if that came about as part of the pandemic, or whether or not we're just getting better at pushing and advocating for ourselves. Mm-hmm. But I do see those as big wins and big positive parts, at least.
Also, I want to add about the salaries. So when I started this many years ago in working in games, everything was hush hush. No one knows who was going to pay what and how long and how experienced and stuff like that. And seeing a graph like yours, Adam, actually stating exactly how long does it take to get to a certain point in the brackets and all that stuff, is an absolute gem for people to go like, I've been at this at 6 years.
Mhm.
I'm actually getting underpaid. I need to be asking for this much on average. So that's really, really cool.
That's honestly really great to hear. Thank you. Because everything I try to do for this is just to help out the animation community.
You do a great
Thank you.
job. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mhm.